development, and he's harvesting them all year round in his greenhouses and selling them to local grocery stores, and it's working. But so Edwin does not farm at all the way he plans. He has basically a lot of advantages that most of the farmers in Honduras don't have. He has this steady source of water from a spring up the hill from his greenhouses, so that's a big one. And then he was able to get a loan to pay for the greenhouses and the rest of the irrigation system. And then lastly, his last advantage is that he has some money of his own that he made in the U.S. when he came here to work when he was younger.
That was in 2002.
So, and his family actually has a pretty complicated migration story as well. His father left to come work in the U.S. when Edwin Guillen was only 5. And so he grew up really without his father here. His father was in the U.S. and I think supporting the family, but absent. And when Edwin came of age, he decided he wanted to go to the U.S.
Yeah, he told us that he wanted to come to the U.S. to look for his father. He told us that the dad basically stayed in touch for a few years after he left Honduras, and then he disappeared. And so Edwin told us that his family was broken by migration, and that he felt abandoned, and he felt sort of like not whole without a dad. And so that's why in 2002 he came to Baltimore in Maryland to look for his dad.
And he found him.
Yeah, he did.
But it was not exactly what he expected.
Lo encontré, pero no se quiso venir. Allá siguió.
I found him, but he didn't want to come back. I'm the oldest of 3 brothers and knew I had to come back to help my brothers and to work our land.
The other advantage that Edwin has is that his family owns the land. Many farmers in Honduras have to rent land.
Yeah, which would limit what you can do. But so Edwin came back, and now he's this successful farmer, and he's got a big house, the biggest house we saw while we were in Honduras, and a shiny truck that he uses to drive his produce to market. And he's an employer, right? I mean, he has, I think, a dozen workers working in his greenhouse. I think Edwin's story shows us that agriculture is viable in Honduras, but it's expensive. It requires investment and infrastructure and know-how. And Edwin clearly has put all that together, but that's not available to the vast majority of farmers in Honduras. And, I don't think that's going to be an option certainly for people like Jesus and her mother, maybe not even for Francis and the parents' family. My sense is that there will be people like Edwin Guillen who will continue to find ways to do agriculture, even on a small scale or on a medium scale. But I have the feeling that the direction this is heading is that more people are going to be leaving. They won't be able to support themselves doing the agriculture the way they have. It just isn't going to be an option.
And I think that we were able to see that climate change is real and it's having an impact on farming.
Yeah, and I guess those people are going to go somewhere. Whether it's internally in Honduras, whether it's to the U.S. or somewhere in between. If they can't make a living doing agriculture, I don't think they're going to stay in these little towns. So, I think the pressures on people to migrate are only going to get more intense.
I agree.
I'm Aisha Roscoe, and you've been listening to The Sunday Story. This episode was produced by Andrew Lombo and Emily Silver and edited by Jenny Schmidt. It was engineered by Margaret Luthar. Our team also includes Henry Hottie and Justine Yan. Our supervising producer is Liana Simstrom, and our executive producer is Irene Noguchi. We love to hear from you. Send us an email at thesundaystory@npr.org. I'm Aisha Roscoe. Up first, we'll be back tomorrow with all the news you need to start your week. Until then, have a great rest of your weekend.
school delivered straight to your ears. Every Wednesday till Labor Day on Planet Money from NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, the Capital One Quicksilver Card. You don't need special gadgets to be a hero. With unlimited 1.5% cash back on every purchase everywhere, the Capital One Quicksilver Card makes you the hero of every purchase. Whether it's headphones, a lounge chair, or even a well-deserved massage, you're the hero. No fighting bad guys or parachuting out of buildings. Simple, isn't it? The Capital One Quicksilver Card. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. Lung cancer is the leading cancer killer of men and women, but it is more curable when detected early. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and the Ad Council.
The tallest dam in the U.S. sits above a place called Oroville, a town of about 20,000 people in Northern California. In 2017, the dam at Oroville started to come apart. Heavy rain sent millions of gallons of water down its concrete spillway. The flow found a weak spot, and small cracks soon became giant holes. Chunks of concrete started tumbling down the hillside. This particular dam is 770 feet tall. If it failed, it could send a wall of water 300 feet high toward the valley below, wiping out the town. My name is Christopher Cox, and I'm a contributor to the New York Times Magazine. This week's Sunday Read is a story I wrote about the dams of California and the risks they face from extreme weather. California has always been subject to cycles of extreme drought, followed by incredibly wet years. The state's dams were built in part to take that erratic weather and tame it, to store water from the wet years and parcel it out over the dry ones. It's that system that allowed California to become the agricultural powerhouse of the country. The dam that people in this country are probably most familiar with is the Hoover Dam. It's an arch dam, a big sweep of concrete wedged into a canyon. There were some of those arch dams in California, but there are a whole lot more of a different kind called an embankment dam. These usually have a core made of clay and are covered with earth and rocks. The upside to these dams is that they stand up well to earthquakes. The downside is that if even just a little bit of water starts to flow over the top of it, it's incredibly dangerous. This is called overtopping, and an overtopped embankment dam can wash away like a sandcastle. That's the scenario Oroville faced in 2017. Many of California's dams share a fatal flaw. They were designed and built using flood data from the middle of the last century, an unusually calm period in the state's weather. So some of the biggest floods in the history of the West Coast weren't included. And, of course, the possibility of a warming atmosphere wasn't factored in at all. As one scientist told me, all of this infrastructure is designed for a climate that no longer exists. After the Oroville crisis, we heard from experts who said that other dams were at risk. It was then that I began investigating. What would happen if an even bigger series of storms hit the state? As you'll hear, it proved to be a trickier question to answer than I ever would have imagined. We need to prepare. Future storms will bring unprecedented destruction, and a type of flooding brought by a dam failure, a wave of water taller than a tsunami, will be devastating. Will California be ready? So here's my article, The Trillion-Gallon Question, read by Robert Petkoff.
The Trillion-Gallon Question. What if California's dams fail? Published in the New York Times Magazine. Written by Christopher Cox. On the morning of February 7th, 2017, 2 electricians were working on a warning siren near the spillway of Oroville Dam, 60 miles north of Sacramento, when they heard an explosion. As they watched, a giant plume of water rose over their heads, and chunks of concrete began flying down the hillside toward the Feather River. The dam's spillway, a concrete channel capable of moving millions of gallons of water out of the reservoir in seconds, was disintegrating in front of them. If it had to be taken out of service, a serious rainstorm, like the one that had been falling on Northern California for days, could cause the dam, the tallest in the United States, to fail. Corey Honey, the sheriff of Butte County, which includes the dam and the town it is named for, first heard that something was wrong from Dino Corbin, a local radio personality who called him at his office. "Are you aware there's a hole in the spillway?" Around the same time, one of the sheriff's dispatchers received a confusing message from California's Department of Water Resources, which owns the dam, saying it was conducting a routine inspection after reports of an incident. "I don't believe anyone at DWR was intentionally keeping information from me," Honey told me. "They were a siloed organization, steeped in bureaucracy. They weren't good at communicating externally." Honey sent his undersheriff up to the dam headquarters to figure out what was going on. At the dam, DWR officials closed the gates at the top of the spillway to prevent any more of its concrete slabs from being lost in what an independent forensic report prepared after the incident described as a sudden explosive failure. The flow of water stopped. The rain, however, didn't. On February 8th, Honey drove up to the dam from Oroville, a gold rush town that was set out on a grid along the Feather. Nearly 20,000 people lived there, all of them downstream of the dam. At certain points during the drive, Honey would have been able to glimpse it. 770 feet high and nearly 7,000 feet wide at its crest, a gray wedge jammed between 2 hills. Oroville is an earth-fill embankment dam with a clay core and a surface of loosely placed rocks. These structures can be incredibly resilient, especially to earthquakes. Concrete dams like Hoover Dam are rare in seismically active California, but they are also more vulnerable if overtopped. Once water overwhelms the spillway and starts flowing over an embankment dam, its layers can melt away at an astonishing speed. If Oroville failed in this way, it would send a wave more than 185 feet tall sweeping into the valley below. At the dam's Operations and Maintenance Center, DWR had set up a command post in the main conference room. The room was about the size of a squash court with a giant table in the middle, but still they needed a tent in the parking lot to accommodate everyone. Engineers, geologists, DWR executives, federal officials, fire and rescue. They were all in the conference room plotting erosion patterns, not thinking the sheriff's office might like to know what they're up to, Honey says. Scott Turnquist, an engineer at the dam, describes the situation so chaotic they didn't even know if the site of the command center was safe from flooding if the dam failed. "We didn't have good inundation maps," he says, "and so we are real-time trying to generate those to understand whether we are at risk." For days, the group in the conference room tried to figure out how to stop Lake Oroville from rising despite the steady rain. They put the hobbled spillway back in service, but the stream dove into the hole and threw even more concrete into the air. Eventually, nearly half the spillway was gone, and the erosion started creeping toward the top of the dam. Oroville had a kind of safety valve to prevent overtopping, an emergency spillway next to the main spillway that could release vast quantities of water. There wasn't much to this spillway. It was an unimproved slope covered with dirt and trees with a concrete lip called an OG weir at the top. The weir was there to prevent the same kind of runaway erosion that would happen if water flowed over the dam itself. In the 50 years since the dam was completed, the emergency spillway had never been used. On the evening of February 10th, DWR decided to reduce the outflow on the main spillway, effectively ensuring the emergency spillway would be used. One representative from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission had asked whether it was really the end of the world if they went an inch over the emergency spillway. They would soon find out. At around 7 the next morning, water started flowing down the emergency spillway. The geologists in the room had warned that the rock below the weir was unstable. After a large section of it eroded suddenly, they started talking about the dangers of head cutting, the possibility that the erosion would travel up the hill and undermine the concrete weir. By 3:25 p.m. on February 12th, the judgment in the command center was that within 2 to 4 hours, the weir could topple over, sending a wall of water as high as 50 feet rushing toward town. At 4:27 p.m., Honey issued a mandatory evacuation order. To establish the size of the evacuation zone, he pulled out a map and called over Bill Croyle, the acting director of DWR. "Should it be this big?" he asked, dropping his hands down on the map about 2 feet apart. "Maybe not that big," Croyle said. "How about this?" Honey asked, this time keeping his hands about 10 inches apart. Croyle had him move his hands a little bit wider. As many as 180,000 people ended up having to leave their homes. Honey called in law enforcement from throughout the region to help with the evacuation. He recognized the gravity of calling all these officers into the inundation path. "I may not have a department tomorrow," he thought. As the citizens of Oroville jammed the roads out of town, the sheriff's department started to evacuate the jail. They had 578 inmates in custody, far more than could fit in Butte County's prison buses and vans, so they commandeered anything that had wheels. They saved their limited stockpile of handcuffs and waist chains for the most violent prisoners. Even so, on one of the high-security buses, the inmates tried to kick the door open. The lower-risk evacuees were put unshackled in regular school buses. Eventually, the prisoners wound up in Alameda County in the Santa Rita jail, where they stayed for days. After the evacuation, the situation at the dam stabilized. The rain let up, and the main spillway, although badly damaged, was able to channel enough water out of the reservoir to drop the level below the top of the emergency spillway. Slowly, the townspeople returned to their homes. Today, the dam has 2 new spillways, each of which survived major rains this spring with no problems. According to Honey, though, the people of Oroville remain traumatized. During a meeting with DWR officials in 2019, one resident worried about the next incident. "I think about a little baby. They can't save themselves," she said. "We can't save ourselves if that dam breaks or if we have another one of these catastrophic events, which I'm not sure we won't in my lifetime." The independent forensic report faulted an immature, significantly overconfident and complacent culture at DWR. Officials ignored reports about the flawed rock below the emergency spillway, made repairs in a haphazard way, and failed to find flaws in the spillway design, most notably drains that made the concrete more susceptible to cracking. The report also noted that this attitude is typical among large dam owners. The fact that this incident happened to the owner of the tallest dam in the United States, under regulation of a federal agency, with repeated evaluation by reputable outside consultants, in a state with a leading dam safety regulatory program, is a wake-up call for everyone involved in dam safety. In the 6 years since Oroville, dam operators across the country have begun to reassess the structures under their control, looking for hidden weaknesses. The cracks in the spillway, the hillside that crumbles at the first sign of water. That work is necessary, but it may not be enough to prevent the next disaster. Bigger storms are on the way. We still haven't severely tested California's primary flood control structures, says Daniel Swain, a climate scientist at the University of California, Los Angeles. The emergency spillway at Oroville, for example, was operating at about 3% of its capacity when Honey ordered the evacuation. If we had an even marginally bigger event on the weather front that year, Swain says, it would have been significantly worse. Dale Cox, a former project manager at the United States Geological Survey who has worked extensively with Swain, told me that California's dams are unprepared for extreme weather because state water authorities have a false sense of how bad flooding can get. The peak of record is driving a lot of engineering decisions in the state, he says, and that peak is an underestimate, maybe a gross one. Already we are seeing several 100-year floods every 10 years. Some of this miscalculation arises from our failure to account for climate change, a problem that will only get worse as the atmosphere heats up and the amount of water vapor it can carry increases. All of this infrastructure, Swain says, is designed for a climate that no longer exists. But the error also lies in our understanding of the past. Most of the flood data that form the basis for the design of California's dams come from the past century, which was an unusually placid period in the state's weather. Around 3 decades ago, meteorologists' mental map of the state was given a jolt when satellites became sophisticated enough to pick up what came to be called atmospheric rivers. These storms, which resemble a lasso of rain thrown across the Pacific Ocean to the west coast, deliver what Swain described to be as almost incomprehensible volumes of water. In the mid-2000s, Cox assembled a group at the USGS to study what would happen if the atmospheric rivers from 2 notable California flood years, 1969 and 1986, occurred back-to-back. They named the resulting scenario the Arc Storm, flooding throughout the state, water depths of up to 20 feet in the Central Valley, and economic losses of $725 billion. When the report on this research was done, the authors presented it to emergency managers, municipal authorities, and dam owners, including DWR. The response was demoralizing. They said, "That's too big. That's ridiculous," says Lucy Jones, the chief scientist for the project. The authors of the Arc Storm report had a response ready, however. Their imaginary storm was modeled on the Great Flood of 1862, which also made a lake of the Central Valley and destroyed, by one account, a quarter of all the buildings in the state. The minute that you say this is too big, this couldn't happen, this is unrealistic, says Michael Dettinger, a hydrologist who worked on the report, I can just point at 1862 and say 1862 was far worse than this. In April 2021, Cox took me on a walk along the American River, about 30 minutes northeast of Sacramento. Somewhere downstream of Folsom Prison, he said, was a reliable high water mark for the 1862 flood. Because it was so long ago, water authorities didn't count it as an official peak of record, but it showed what the river was capable of. It was a hot and sunny day, but Cox wore blue jeans, black Vans, and a black t-shirt with a paisley shirt over it. He looked like an aging session bassist with a gray goatee and sunglasses. We established, after a thorough discussion of our respective genealogies, that we aren't related. Cox was not a scientist.
Hello, McDonald's. We're gonna get you today.
Hi, I got my kiosk code.
What is it? I'm sorry.
4025.
Alright.
I'll take 3 McDoubles, a 6-piece McNuggets, and a small fries.
That be all?
That's all.
Alright, what sauce are those nuggets?
Barbecue, please.
Alright. So it's gonna be 12.17. First one then.
Thanks.
Huh?
All right.
What sauce would you like over there?
Thanks. Hello.
I'm gonna have you put on to the next window for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. I got a few minutes before I have to pick up my friend. Scarf this down real quick. Damn. Tramp's going turtle slow. Alright, let's go. Busy. What's up?
Journalist. My role is going out and getting the ball rolling, starting the project, recruiting people, he said. His training proved useful because it taught him how to cut across disciplines and how to ask a lot of annoying questions. I could see his mind at work when he talked about a project to restore the natural banks of the Los Angeles River. Experts had all sorts of stolid objections or arguments in favor of it. He was the one to ask, once these habitats reunite, will we have to worry about mountain lions coming down and eating people's pets? About a mile up the American River Canyon, we reached a gate that read, Folsom State Prison, no trespassing. Cox pressed up against the fence and pointed just upriver to a flat spot on the bank across from us where there was a pile of boulders. That, he said, is where Stockton and Coover Flour Mill once stood. Contemporary accounts noted that the water reached the mill's stone stable, which survived into the 20th century. By using the stable as a high water mark for the American River, researchers were able to set the peak discharge of the river during the flood at more than 300,000 cubic feet per second, greater than the median flow of the Mississippi River at St. Louis, and far above the peak of record. On the day I was there, the American River was rolling along steadily at 1,000 cubic feet per second. Did presenting state officials with these numbers make a difference, I asked. No, he said. So many of the officials he talked to about Arkstorm were like the mayor in Jaws, unwilling to see a problem they couldn't fix. Most officials wanted to do nothing if possible, or if they had to do something, they wanted it to be the cheapest thing they could get away with. Cox thought part of the reason he faced resistance was that a flood is not a charismatic disaster like an earthquake. It is less sudden, less dramatic, the wreckage ugly. Whereas an earthquake is more like an act of God, he said, flooding points out the flaws of man. The original plan for the Arkstorm scenario was to have DWR and other agencies translate the storms they had created into water on the ground, turning meteorology into hydrology. But according to Cox, DWR ghosted the Arkstorm project about 3/4 of the way through. He never got a straight answer about why, but one of his contacts there told him it was political. Is that a capital P or a small p? Cox asked. My own reporting would eventually reveal another possible answer. The numbers were scary enough to shut down any discussion. The best the Arkstorm team could manage for the final report was this line, buried on page 59, which read like a statement from a hostage negotiation. Because of the extremely sensitive nature of a dam damage scenario, the selection of a particular dam to imagine as hypothetically damaged in such a way is left to emergency planners. After 2017, Dettinger and Cox made a list of what they would do differently if they could start over from scratch. What are the things that we assumed wouldn't happen or that we just misjudged where they might happen? Dettinger says. And top of that list was, man, we shouldn't have taken dam safety off the table.
Hey, it's Ben Truman, editor-in-chief of Wirecutter. We put together few of our writers' favorite tips.
When you move into your new place, it's not a priority to have everything to make a beef Wellington for your first night, but you are going to want a knife to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, probably.
What do you recommend?
Buy a mattress bag. You can carry a mattress more easily because the handles are built in, and it's going to protect your mattress from the truck and the street.
Let's talk safety essentials.
When you're first moving into your home, make sure that you change the batteries to your smoke detector. It just gives you a peace of mind, and you don't have to worry about the tricky sound that happens every minute or so.
I've gone to the grocery store for used empty boxes.
That's no good. Invest in good boxes. It will save you so much time and money.
Make sure you have towels on hand. You don't want to end up taking a shower and using a dirty sock to dry off. Yeah.
Whether you're prepping, moving, or settling into your new place, let Wirecutter help you make a plan. Come visit us at nytimes.com/moving.
Dam failures are rare, but when they happen, they can be deadly. Nearly as many lives were lost following the 1889 collapse of the South Fork Dam near Johnstown, Pennsylvania, as in the attack on Pearl Harbor. When St. Francis Dam near Los Angeles breached in 1928, it unleashed a wall of water that was initially 140 feet tall, carrying off people and houses and animals before emptying into the Pacific Ocean some 50 miles away. And yet, as I discovered in examining the fallout from Oroville, dam safety is an orphaned problem. Meteorologists tend to talk only about weather. Hydrologists will tell you only about stream flows. Engineers know about concrete, but can't comment on climate. Climatologists look at systems, but rarely want to make specific predictions. Everyone is stuck in the mesoscale, the realm between macro and microclimate concerns, where everything is just fine-grained enough to appear blurry. Ultimately, responsibility lies with state and federal authorities, but it's not clear that any single entity is capable of seeing the whole picture. So much water is moved around California by so many different agencies, Joe Dinian wrote in 1977, that maybe only the movers themselves know on any given day whose water is where. Little has changed since then. DWR has regulatory authority over more than 1,200 dams. The Bureau of Reclamation owns and operates 45, including some of the largest in the state, and hundreds more belong to private utilities and local water authorities from Wairika to Chula Vista. For any dam receiving federal funding, the Army Corps of Engineers also plays a role. The Corps usually had at least a hand in, if not total responsibility for, the building of these dams, and it helped write the water control manual for each of them. The manual dictates when a dam should hold on to water during a flood and when it should release it. It is the Bible for dam operations, with one unbreakable commandment: a dam shall not be overtopped. Ettinger was the first person to tip me off that dam owners may have a bigger problem than they publicly acknowledged. He began by telling me about a meeting he and the ArcStorm team had in La Jolla with Maurice Roos, the former chief hydrologist for DWR, who had been with the department since 1957. In that meeting, Roos claimed that Folsom Dam, which is owned by the Bureau of Reclamation, had come within 6 hours of overtopping in 1986. 6 more hours of rain, and the dam might have been lost. Ettinger said that something similar had happened in 2017, even while everyone was watching Oroville. I'm told by people who know these things pretty well at DWR that there were some significant risks elsewhere, where they really were in danger of having water go over the top of some of these dams. He called the overall situation spooky. Without a detailed model of how the ArcStorm would translate into water levels within the state's reservoirs, though, the authors of the report were left gesturing at a general calamity. That was the outstanding missing piece, says Christine Albano, a researcher at the Desert Research Institute in Reno, Nevada, who worked with the ArcStorm team. To remedy that, shortly before his retirement, Cox began assembling a new group of collaborators, including Albano and Swain, for a project he called ArcStorm 2.0. Specifically, the group wanted to examine how a warmer climate August, Swain and Xinying Huang of the National Center for Atmospheric Research published a paper that predicted a storm called Arc Future that would be a supercharged version of 1862. 30 days of unrelenting rain across the whole state. It would be a transformational event for California without any doubt, if and when it recurs, Swain says. In the next 40 years, he and Huang determined, the odds of such a storm sequence occurring were as high as 50%. The detailed hydrology for Arcstorm 2.0 is still being worked out, but Albano told me that the Army Corps had already done a preliminary analysis. At her suggestion, Mike Vargas, an engineer at the Army Corps' Hydraulic Engineering Center, had run the sequence through a model he developed. The results were astounding, but she wasn't sure she could send them to me directly. Armed with Albano's information, I went to the Army Corps to request a copy of Vargas' analysis. It took time to receive approval. We have a completed draft response that is undergoing internal review, but eventually the document arrived in my inbox. A series of charts detailing what would happen to 6 of the largest reservoirs in California during the 30-day storm sequence predicted by Swain and Huang. Some of the information was merely alarming. By matching up Bartles' data with public information about the reservoir's outlet capacities, I could imagine the floods playing out in real time. It was apparent that Oroville Dam's emergency spillway would be tested again. As much as 2 whole days of water running down the dirt slope at levels far beyond those seen in 2017. The same went for Don Pedro Dam, which would need to push huge volumes of water over its never-before-used emergency spillway. Even if the dam survived, the expected outflow from Don Pedro would be multiple times the capacity of the levees downstream. Other parts of the document were terrifying. 2 large dams owned by the Bureau of Reclamation, Friant and New Melones, looked likely to overtop. Each would have periods when they would be taking on water faster than they could spill it, and they would reach those moments when the reservoirs were nearly full. Friant Dam, which is situated in the hills above Fresno, population 544,500, would take on an incredible 6 times its total volume in the course of the month. New Melones would have a peak inflow that was more than twice what it could release, and its spillway couldn't be used until the water was near the crest of the dam. In the probable inundation zone for New Melones were most of the 218,800 people of Modesto. If these projections were correct, it would create an unprecedented amount of destruction. The Army Corps studied what would happen to 6 dams in California, and the results suggested that 2 of them would probably be overtopped. It seemed unlikely that a third of all the dams in the state would fail, but would none of them? When reached for comment, the Army Corps stressed that the model was largely theoretical and not meant to demonstrate the hydrologic, hydraulic, and economic consequences that would be likely to occur during this hypothetical event. The Bureau of Reclamation did not reply to a request for comment on the models prepared by Bartles, but the Army Corps confirmed that the organization had been briefed on it. Cox described the weird Chinatown vibe whenever the conversation turned to dams. I knew what he was talking about. In the course of my reporting this article, sources would stutter and shut down whenever dams came up. Public documents that might have been easily emailed to me instead had to be extracted via Freedom of Information Act or Public Records Act requests. In one memorable moment, the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services sent me a copy of the Northern California Catastrophic Flood Response Plan that was markedly different from a draft version I had found. The changes all played down the risks involved. I thought of Cox's comment after I sent the flooding models for Arcstorm 2.0 to Dettacher. Where he had once been voluble, "I'll talk your arm off," he told me during our first conversation, now he shut down the discussion quickly. "I have nothing to say about the inflows because they're not my numbers," he wrote to me in an email. "Please, just lose my email address, okay?" I never heard from him again. In March, I drove to Oroville to see what had changed since 2017. Even dams that should be able to handle the flows from Swain and Huang's storm would still need to perform perfectly. The water would find any weaknesses. On the way up from Sacramento, the signs of the wet winter were everywhere. Flooded fields glinting like mica on the horizon. Brown hills turned green. A waterway called Dry Creek overflowing its banks. Originally, Dale Cox was meant to accompany me for the meeting, but DWR pulled permission for him to go at the last minute. My boss approved, but it was nixed by higher-ups, the public information officer at the dam wrote. When I relayed this message to Cox, he smiled ruefully. The fact they didn't want me there is wonderful, he said. I was surprised. Recently, DWR agreed to fund hydrological studies based on ArcStorm 2.0, similar to the ones done by Bartles. And when I spoke with Carla Namath, who has been DWR's director since 2018, she was refreshingly candid about the challenges ahead. She called the ArcStorm 2.0 storm sequence plausible, even though it's a tough scenario to put on the table because it's overwhelming. Namath also admitted that some of the state's dams were not up to snuff. Under her leadership, DWR had begun to plan for major disruptions caused by flooding, not least the prospect of moving hundreds of thousands of people out of harm's way on short notice. Do you ever feel